Hey everyone, I'm here today to talk about the latest ethno versus civic nationalist debate on Warski Live. I'm going to give my opinion. First off, I want to say that this was a great conversation. It was very civil. Got a little heated at a couple points, but overall very civil. Very much worth the watch. And it was between Richard Spencer with his sidekick JF and V and Arch Warhammer. I'm familiar with all of these people, and I will say right off the bat that, as usual, the ethno-nationalist side has won. This is my opinion, and I'm going to explain why. First off, it should be noted that the alternative right has already won the battle of, let's call it moral justification for the establishment of the ethno-state. It's no longer arguable against the right to associate with whoever you please. This is no longer the argument. So everyone agrees that if we found a tenable solution that forming an ethno-state peacefully is fine. If you Richard, go off in Montana and buy 100 hectares of land and then invite a bunch of white people. Yeah, it's a tired old argument, but at least we're to that point. It's we've already won the first battle. Now we just have to continue to win the battles until we win the war. So in this debate, primarily, I think there are two, maybe three main points of contention that the civic nationalists have with the ethno solution. And the first one is legal implementation. They are very hard line on the legal implementation of the ethno state. And here's where I find issue with classical liberals and the liberalists and civic nationalists, is that they have fetishized the legality and democratic system to the point where they cannot even foresee any other alternative to the system. They hold their liberal democratic values on such a high pedestal. If anyone even dare challenges that, then they're automatically some dumb caveman who simply doesn't get it. The whole Reed, Locke, or Loki thing kind of speaks to that. I mean, have you even gotten to my level before, you absolute intellectual plebeian? It's that kind of high and mighty shit. So they have this very lofty, idealistic opinion of liberal or classical liberal democracy. So any solution outside of that, to them, is just barbarism, which I think is ridiculous. There are plenty of solutions that maybe they're not intelligent enough to think of that I can think of. So when you argue with them, you have to keep this framework in mind. The best way to win them over is to come up with a solution that's legal within their frameworks, let's so to say. This is a sort of sneaky, underhanded tactic, but in the court of public opinion, it works. So further along the question of legal implementation, there's also the question of realistic or pragmatic implementation. And this is what I find extremely ridiculous, is that the civic nationalist position is that the solution to the issue is to stop all immigration, which we all agree with, no issues there, but dealing with the populations that are already within your society, simply assimilating them into the sort of national identity is all you need to solve problems. Well, this is, of course, extremely naive and unrealistic. I mean, they want to harp on and on about, oh, well, it's not realistic that you'll get your ethno-state. Nah, la, 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 all that shit. Their solution for just simply assimilating people is not going to work. I did a video on why I think civic nationalism will fail. I'll link it down below. You should go check that out. But essentially, assimilation is not only a highly unrealistic goal, but is also a goal that is not a short-term, one-stop shop, fix-it-all solution. It is not the flex tape of political ideals. It is going to take at least 2 to 3 generations to reintegrate or integrate these migrants into your society. And in many cases, when you're talking about Islamists, even the second and third generation Muslim immigrants are more radical than their parents are. They're more anti-Western than their parents are because they have to live inside this decadent society that they see. And there's multiple other reasons, but I won't go into that. But just look it up. They're having a problem in Europe and America where the second and third generation migrants are becoming more and more radical as our society decays. But anyway, their solution, another point of contention they had is that the ethno-state is some, far-off ideal. JF brings up the point that white replacement might happen in 500 years. Well, I disagree with that number. The idea is correct. The number, I think, is too big. But it's also not something that's going to happen within 5 years, which is, I think, something that Richard mentioned. However, the liberalists here kind of go on and say, well, your ethno-state is 50 years in the making. And it's like, okay, what is it going to take 2 or 3 generations down the road to fully assimilate these foreign people into your culture? And what happens in the meantime when your society collapses? And this leads into the next point of contention that they have, which I've decided to call the crisis. Now, you might be wondering, what is the crisis? Well, the crisis is the upcoming collapse of modern-day society. And I know this, it sounds ridiculous. This can't possibly happen. Well, I'm going to tell you this now. There is going to be another World War I situation. We are sitting on top of an atom bomb, and it's only going to take one dead Franz Ferdinand to set that motherfucker off and burn this world to the ground. Everyone is on pins and needles right now. And if you can't understand that, then you must not be in the real world paying attention to what's going on, because everyone is constantly on pins and needles, especially in the United States. And this is where I think V and Arch are not in a field of expertise, because they're not Americans. They don't have to experience this. Even JF, he lives in Quebec. It's similar, sort of, to the American experience, but it's not quite as extreme, mainly because it's a completely different country. But regardless, the American collapse is coming. It is almost unavoidable unless you make some extreme change, the likes of which we have never seen in history, to culture, the economy, the politics. I mean, you would have to completely tear down the financial system, completely change the culture of minorities. You would have to completely destroy this left-right dichotomy and change fundamentally how the United States functions. And this is not a tenable solution. This is not what I'm advocating for. But you have to understand that this system will collapse. We have been living in a new Gilded Age since the post-war period. It cannot possibly survive. We consume too much. We throw away too much. There is too much debt. The financial system will collapse at some point or another, and there's very few ways that we can maintain this, I think, without the right-wing solution of order, hierarchy, authority, and tradition. The civic nationalists do not have, I haven't heard any real solutions to the upcoming crisis. In fact, V and Arch don't think that there is an incoming crisis. And I watched the after-show stream on V's channel a couple hours after it went off, and they laughed at the idea that there's a crisis. And I would say that they're living in an absolute bubble. They're so naive to think that there is no collapse imminent, whether it's racial, whether it's political, whether it's economical, whether it's simply interstate or cultural. It's going to happen one way or another. Take, for example, I live in an area where there is an extreme amount of racial tension. The race war is only one dead thug away from igniting. This is the Franz Ferdinand effect. One simple thing can cause a Ferguson-type riot, and then the whole system burns to the fucking ground. It is that bad. And it's not just black on white. It's blacks and Hispanics here hate each other, and they're constantly murdering each other over territory. It's consistent. I don't know how else to explain it. Maybe I need to tell some more stories. But it's also, Asians and the rent-seeking upper-class Jewish people downtown who consistently like to kick everyone out of their high-rent apartments and then tear the place down and then build luxury condos or whatever. Yeah, it's not just, okay, they're literally killing each other. It's cultural things as well. But we look at political divide in the United States. It's a fucking Grand Canyon. You have on the one side, relatively sane, normal Trump supporters who just like America and guns and things like that. Typical patriot kind of things. Then you have, pretty normal urban Democrat liberals, not too dangerous, but, degenerate in a lot of ways. And then you have, on the extremes, you have a far-right proponents who want to burn the fucking system to the ground, and then you have far-right leftists like Antifa who want to burn the fucking system to the ground. I consider myself on the right side of that. I'm waiting for the whole thing to collapse, but eventually we're going to come clashing with each other. So, for example, if the Trump presidency was to be contested, there's going to be some fucking shit going down because obviously, 60 million people voted for Trump. Most of those people see this whole Russian investigation thing as bullshit. If anyone tries to take him down on this, there will be a civil conflict. In the same vein, if anyone tries to repeal the Second Amendment or the First Amendment or make any changes to the Constitution, there will be a civil conflict. Is this going to be as bad as the 1860s Civil War? Maybe, maybe not. We don't know. But there is going to be a conflict, and the system will change dramatically. There's always the threat of a balkanization of the United States. California, talking about secession. Texas, we've always been talking about secession, but, it's always a possibility. Economics, we're $22 trillion in debt. It's going to come back and bite us in the ass. Our financial system is run by an elite group of assholes who consistently use it for their own gain. It's a debt-backed currency, fiat economy. It's all fake money. We have a major spending problem. The futures of our children are being whittled away by the expenditure of people in Congress. But, all of these things are going to either come together in a beautiful light show of atomic display, or we're going to slowly whittle away and solve these problems, which is the right-wing solution. As I've said before, order, hierarchy, authority, tradition. We segregate ourselves into the classical nation state, which I'm going to do a presentation on once I get some more time to do reading, but either that or the civic nationalist thing will continue to erode the United States until it comes to the point of full-on civil war. So, maintaining the status quo, which is sort of what the civic nationalists do, except with more of a center-right twist, is only going to slow the decline just a little bit. The further right solution is going to definitely make a change that can be permanent based on which ideology you may be a part of. The issue here is that still, again, for the 9th, 10th, 12th, however many fucking times I've had to say this, the civic nationalist position is not based in reality. It's completely unrealistic because of it. They're incredibly naive, and every time they talk about it, they get blown the fuck out by people who know what they're talking about. So, I still recommend going and watching the debate. It was really good, civil, ideas got out there. I don't think that the discussion about the EU was necessary. I would, if I could say something to Richard Spencer, it would be tone down the idealism, because most people aren't intelligent enough to be that future-oriented. I understand what you're saying, but if you go back and listen to V and Arch talk about your lofty idealism, it's like two cavemen hitting each other over the head with clubs. They just don't get it. So, we can talk about a unified right-wing European Union amongst ourselves. It's not something that needs to be discussed in the civ versus ethno-nationalist debate, all right? Anyway, that's about all I have to say. I'm running a little bit long on this video here. If you enjoyed this content, subscribe, leave a like, find me on Twitter or Discord, check the About section of the channel, and thanks for listening.